Hi there, this video is going to explain what I do when I sit down for practice, when I sit down to figure out a scale and play a scale. When I practice, I like to play a scale, and for now we're just going to use a 1-octave scale for this demonstration. I oftentimes do a 2-octave scale, but we'll move on to that after we really get this scale nailed down, a 1-octave scale. And today we're going to do D major because I know that you're trying to learn Angel from Montgomery, which is in D, or at least the version we're singing. So first things first, we grab our circle of fifths chart and we find D. As you can see, D has 2 sharps. I like to write down 2 sharps because, like we talked about, writing things down sometimes is really helpful. Helps your brain process this information from a more cerebral place, and then when you're playing, you're processing this stuff in a more auditory sense, a more creative sense, so it's good to come at it from a couple different perspectives. So once we figure out that we have 2 sharps in this scale, we'll go ahead and get our metallic dry erase marker that shows up on the black keys and the white keys to mark our keys. And this is when we're just figuring the scale out. Once you have the scale memorized, you're not going to need to mark it up anymore. Unless you want to, unless you want like a little refresher. You want to like sharpen this up, sharpen your skills up if you feel like it's kind of falling out of your brain or whatever. So I'm going to start with the accidentals. I'm going to start with those 2 sharps. When we have sharps in a scale, we start from the left side of these black blocks of keys. So we're going to start from the left side, and if there's 2, we're going to put 1 here. We're going to go to the next block of keys and put 1 here. 1, 2. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just how I remember it. Start from the left, and you add them going from block to block. So once we have our sharps marked, we're going to go ahead and we're going to mark our naturals. So that's these guys here. Now, because we have 7 total notes in a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, if we put down 2 sharps, that means we're going to have 5 naturals. So, I don't know, I kind of just like to review that information for myself so that when you're playing, it just kind of is a good way for your brain to group that information. Just remember you got 5 naturals, 2 sharps. Okay, so now we have our scale mapped out. These are all the notes that are in the key of D major. So now that we have that, I'm going to go back to, I'm going to go to this whiteboard, or you can use a sheet of paper. I like the whiteboard because you can just erase it and reuse it all the time. So what I do is I write out 7 numbers, 1 through 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, and 7. Try to write them the same amount of space apart so that you can write your notes underneath. So we got 1 through 7, and you can do the next step in one of 2 ways. The first way I'll just explain. So these represent each note in our scale or in our key, 1 through 7. So that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So all these numbers I wrote down are going to represent each note in our scale. So we can do this one of 2 ways. You can recall it from your memory using the musical alphabet starting with D. So that is D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And you just could know that because it's the musical alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G starts over with A. So we start from D and we can do it from memory that way. Or you can actually look at the keyboard from what we mapped out and just look at the keys and write them down that way. D, E, F, G, A, B. Okay, so now that we've written all of our numbers and notes down, we have them all mapped out, we have them written down, we can go ahead and look at our two accidentals, our two sharps, F sharp and C sharp, and we're going to go ahead and mark those as sharp. Okay, so at this point you have a nice scale written out for yourself. You have each note of the scale written out. So what you can do with that, you have 1 through 7, and you have F sharp and C sharp notated. So what you can do now is put this up on your stand and play your scale looking at that. Okay, so also a quick note, let me sort of backtrack a little bit here. So when we are playing the scales, any scale really, but especially in D, you use a certain pattern with your fingers to play that scale. So we're going to do one hand at a time. We'll start with our left hand, our right hand, excuse me, my right hand. I'm going to start with my right hand. We're starting on D, and I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate that real quick. Oops, start again. Again. So as you see, when I played that through, I did do some finger switching in order that I could smoothly finish that scale. So what happens is you switch on your middle finger. So I'm going to go ahead and slow down and tell you when I switch my fingers. Switch, which means swinging your thumb underneath this finger and placing it on the next note. And finishing out the scale. Okay, so that's how you do it upwards. This is how you do it downwards. You have your pinky on D. You're going to start to descend. Now you're going to switch. You're going to throw your middle finger over your thumb and finish that scale out. And that's how you go down. So eventually that's going to look like this. Switch. Switch. Okay, so that's what it looks like with your left hand, or your right hand. Why do I keep getting that mixed up? With your right hand. So now we're going to do it with your left hand. So now I'll go ahead and do the same thing and just tell you when I'm going to be switching. When your thumb gets here, switch to your middle finger and finish that scale out. Now when you're going down, it's going to be like this. Switch, swinging your thumb underneath your middle finger onto the next note, and finish that scale out. Again, that's going to look like this once it's all put together. Okay, so once you have both of your hands, once you have the D scale figured out with both hands alone, so you can do this and this hands alone, then you can go ahead and put those things together and it's going to look like this. And in order for you to really be able to put these things together, it's going to have to be somewhat memorized, like your muscle memory is really going to have these scales down, hands alone. And one way to be able to tell and test yourself if you really know these things well, hands alone, before you move on to the next step, is to use the rule of 3, which simply means if you can play this scale 3 times in a row without mistakes, without any big mistakes, you know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but that all the notes are right. If you can do this 3 times, if you can do that with somewhat ease, then it's time to put these things together. Okay, so let's say that you've practiced your scales and you can finally play this D scale with your hands together. Now we can move on to the next step and grab our piece of paper or that list we just made with our 1 through 7 notes listed out here. We can take this and we can start figuring out what chords are in this scale. So basically there is a chord that corresponds to each note in this scale, and there are a couple other chords, but these are the chords that you're going to be playing in a key generally. And there are some cases where people will put a chord or a note that doesn't belong in this diatonic scale, and that's called a non-diatonic. So that's just kind of, I guess, bending the rules, or I guess maybe it could technically be considered another scale, but that's a good way to think of it. You have your notes and chords that generally fit into this key, and then every once in a while, in order to create interest or tension, you can add a chord that maybe doesn't typically belong in this key. It's called non-diatonic. But for now, we're just going to be doing everything diatonic. So what we're going to do to figure out our first chord is go to our first note, the tonic note of this scale, D. Put our hand on D. We're going to find 1, 3, and 5. First note, third note, and fifth. That is a major chord. So that's one way you can find your first chord. And you can find it another way, and that is because we know this is a major chord. There's going to be 3 notes in between each note. So it's a major third. 1, 2, 3 notes. You have your third, and from your third to your fifth, there are also 3 notes. 1, 2, 3. Is that right? There's 2 there. Okay, I could be wrong about that. Anyways, forget that. We're just gonna find the first, third, and the fifth. Now, that is your tonic chord, D. Okay, so the way that we notate D as a chord is we just write D, D major, simply D. You don't have to write anything extra there. So in order to find our second chord of this scale, we're going to move each finger over 1 semitone. This chord is an E minor chord. It starts with E. It's a minor chord. I'll explain more about that later, but this is E minor. And so once you know the naming of chords, you'll be able to tell, oh wow, that's E minor. E minor is the second chord in D major. Now from there we're going to find our third chord, which is based on F sharp. So we're going to move each finger up 1 semitone. And because we have all of our keys marked, we know that we're just moving up one semitone within the scale. So we're at E minor, which we just figured out, and now we're moving everything up one semitone within the chord. Within the key, excuse me. This is F sharp minor. And I just wrote a little M next to it that signifies minor. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our fourth note, move over one note within the scale, and we have G major, and that just is written like this, G. I'm going to go to our fifth and move everything over one note within the scale. My E doesn't work. And we have A major, that is also written as just A. Move everything over once again. That's minor. And then our last chord is 7. And again, move everything over one note within the scale how it's marked. This is C sharp diminished. Okay. And C sharp diminished is notated by this little circle. Okay, so now that we've figured out our chords from this method, so that's really great. And the way the numbers method sort of works is that it's going to tell you, here are the chords that are in the song, here's the chord progression. Let's say it's D, G, and B minor. This is a common chord progression. 1, 4, 6. It's the first chord, the fourth chord, and the sixth chord. So yeah, let's say we're playing that. Well, we can go do something like this. So anyways, like that sounds kind of nice together, right? 1, 4, 6. Anyways, those things sound good together, so that's just a little tip. So anyways, say that this song does have D, G, and B. Well, they're going to write those chords out, and sometimes they'll even write the number. And this is the thing you kind of want to keep in mind, that these numbers correspond with the note. So if you wanted to transpose it to a different key, you would take this information, the number of the chord, and then you could translate it into a different key. And there's going to be more on that later. Anyways, I digress. Okay, so now that we have all our chords written out, you can go ahead and practice these chords. And what you can do is, just like we played a scale where we moved up in our notes, we can move upwards and downwards with the order of these chords. So I'll give you an example. D, E minor, F sharp, G, A, B minor, C half diminished. And do you see how when I played those chords upward, it sounded like a scale? So this is going to be really great for you. Once you get your scales nailed down, then you can play your chords in the same way to remind you what chords belong in this key. And again, that's going to take some practice, but this is a good place to start. You're going to go ahead and learn all of your, tonic chords in this key. And what else was I going to say? Okay, so as you see, when we went to find our chords, we started with D major because we know that's the scale we're trying to play. That's the key we're in. We're in D major. And, I gave you the little formula for figuring out the next key. And I know this because I can just look at the chord and see that this is a minor, for instance. Like this second chord is minor. I just know that. And you can tell that once you memorize all the chords, or there's another way. So just in the same way that we write out 1 through 7, 5, 6, 7. There's a little bit of a formula that you'll probably memorize once you play for a while. So regardless of what major key we're in, there's going to be a pattern of what type of chord corresponds to what number in the key. So for every major key or scale that you play, it's the same formula. So the first note in the scale is always a major chord. Number 1 is always a major chord. Number 2 is always a minor chord, every time. Third note is going to be also a minor chord. 2 and 3 are always minor. 4 is always major. 5 is always major, except for in the case that we have a 7th chord, then it's a 7th. This just has a minor 7th on it. I'll explain that more later, but if you're just doing your 3 notes, your triad, 4 and 5 are always major. 6 is always minor. And 7 is always diminished. Diminished. Okay. Alright, so the way that we notate this is major chords don't get any marking at all. They just are their letter D. That represents D major. Minor chords get a small m. Again, minor chords get a small n. Major, major, don't get any notation, minor. And then the half diminished gets this little circle. So anyways, I hope that kind of helps. It might be a while before you get to this point, but go ahead and number your notes. Write the note name out, the letter that corresponds to the name of the note, and then, see if you can try to write, whether this 2nd chord is minor, 3rd chord is minor, the 4th chord major, 5th chord is major. And one last thing is the chords that are going to be in songs most often in a major key are going to be 1, 4, and 5. Not always, but in general, you're going to see these. You're going to see the major chords show up a lot more, which kind of gives it the character of being in a major key. You're hearing more major chord sounds, more of that brighter sound. Okay, so again, first chord is major, 2nd chord is minor, 3rd chord is minor, 4th chord is major, 5th chord is major, 6th chord is minor, 7th chord is diminished, and they're written as so. There's nothing written if it's a major chord, a small m for minor chords, nothing written for major chords. You got B minor with a small m, and then C diminished is notated with a small circle. So with 1, 4, and 5, these major chords, you can play them like this. So we have D. Here, I'll put those board here so we can see 1, 4, and 5. 1, 4, and 5. Okay. So it goes like this. D, G, D, A, D. So we play D tonic in root position, and then we're going to play G with an inversion, and I believe that's the first inversion? Third inversion? Second inversion? Anyway, it's an inversion. Who knows? So it's D root position, G, and that is played as an inversion. Back to D, we're going to go to A. That's also an inversion. Back to D. Okay, so yeah, anyways, I hope that helps. And hopefully you saw the board okay. If you have any questions, just let me know.